April 6, 1945. Off the coast of Okinawa, Radar Picket Station No. 1. Gunner's mate, 2nd Class, Robert Karr, stood at his battle station aboard the destroyer USS Bush, watching his radar-guided fire control system track incoming aircraft that should not have existed in the rational calculations of aerial warfare. The Japanese planes were not attempting to bomb his ship, they were not strafing, they were diving directly into the vessel itself, their pilots making no effort to pull out, no attempt to survive. 100 miles north, Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki was coordinating the first wave of Operation Kikusui, the floating chrysanthemums. He had dispatched 355 kamikaze aircraft toward the American invasion fleet. By sunset, American radar-guided gun directors would destroy 230 of them before they reached their targets. Karr did not yet understand that he was operating a weapons system that would fundamentally alter the mathematics of aerial suicide tactics. The Mark 37 gun director mounted above his head contained technology that turned skilled gunners into killing machines with accuracy no Japanese commander had anticipated when formulating kamikaze doctrine. The proximity-fused shells in his ship's magazines represented the single greatest force multiplier in anti-aircraft warfare since the invention of the exploding shell. Together, these technologies would destroy 70% of all kamikaze aircraft that attempted attacks during the Okinawa campaign. The Japanese had calculated they needed only 10% of kamikazes to reach their targets to make the tactic militarily effective. American defensive technology had rendered those calculations obsolete before the first chrysanthemum fell. The story of how American radar-guided gunners came to dominate kamikaze attacks begins not with desperate Japanese tactics, but with the systematic American approach to solving what appeared to be an insoluble problem. How do you shoot down an aircraft whose pilot intends to die? The answer required combining three distinct technological developments, each representing the cutting edge of 1940s military science: radar fire control that could track targets with unprecedented precision, proximity fuses that could detonate shells at optimal distance from targets, and trained gun crews who understood how to employ both technologies against threats moving at 300 miles per hour. The Japanese High Command, in October 1944, made a strategic calculation based on incomplete information. American naval defenses had improved dramatically since 1942, but Japanese intelligence attributed this to better radar detection and more numerous gun mounts. They did not understand that American shells now carried miniaturized radar systems that transformed aerial combat. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, commanding the First Air Fleet in the Philippines, proposed kamikaze tactics as a solution to Japan's deteriorating aerial capabilities. Standard dive bombing and torpedo attacks were suffering unsustainable casualties against American defenses. 70% of conventional attack aircraft were being shot down before reaching targets. Pilots with minimal training could not execute complex attack maneuvers against ships equipped with radar-directed gunfire. Onishi's calculation was brutally logical. If conventional attacks had a 30% success rate and required pilots to survive and return, why not guarantee 100% of aircraft reached the target zone by removing pilot survival from the equation? A pilot who did not need to pull out of his dive could aim with precision impossible in conventional attacks. If even 20% of kamikaze aircraft struck their targets, the tactic would inflict losses America could not sustain. The first organized kamikaze attacks occurred on October 25, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. 17 aircraft from the Shikishima unit attacked American escort carriers. 5 struck their targets. The escort carrier St. Lo sank. 3 others sustained heavy damage. From a Japanese tactical perspective, this represented a success rate impossible to achieve through conventional means. Onishi reported to Imperial General Headquarters that kamikaze tactics could reverse Japan's strategic position in the Philippines. He projected that if Japan could deploy 3,000 kamikaze aircraft against the American invasion fleet, the resulting losses would force American withdrawal or negotiated peace. The projection assumed that American defenses would remain static, that the tactics and technology employed in October 1944 would remain unchanged through the spring of 1945. This assumption would prove catastrophically incorrect. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The American response to kamikaze tactics began immediately after Leyte Gulf. The Navy's Bureau of Ordnance and Bureau of Ships initiated studies to determine what made certain vessels vulnerable and others resistant. The data revealed patterns that would guide defensive improvements over the following months. Ships equipped with Mark 37 directors and proximity-fused ammunition suffered significantly fewer kamikaze hits than vessels relying on visual fire control and time-fused shells. The Mark 37 gun director, first deployed in 1938, represented the culmination of decades of American development in fire control technology. Mounted high on a ship's superstructure, the director resembled an armored pillbox containing a compact radar system, analog computers, and optical rangefinders. The Mark IV radar component could track aircraft at ranges exceeding 30,000 yards under ideal conditions. The system computed target course, speed, altitude, and rate of change continuously, feeding solutions to gun mounts that automatically trained and elevated to calculated firing positions. A skilled director team could maintain fire control solutions on multiple targets simultaneously, prioritizing threats based on range and bearing. The gun director's fundamental advantage was eliminating human reaction time from the fire control loop. Traditional optical gun laying required a pointer to physically track a moving target through mechanical sights, maintaining perfect alignment while the gun mount swiveled and elevated. Against aircraft traveling at 300 miles per hour, this method introduced delays measured in seconds. Each second's delay at such speeds represented 440 feet of target movement. The Mark 37 system reduced this delay to milliseconds. Radar detected the target. Analog computers calculated the solution. Electric motors automatically positioned the guns. The gun captain's only responsibility was ensuring the solution remained valid and ordering fire at the appropriate moment. But even perfect fire control could not guarantee hitting a maneuvering target. A 5-inch shell traveled at 2,600 feet per second, but required 7 to 10 seconds to reach a target at 10,000 yards range. During those seconds, an aircraft could change course, altitude, or speed. The shell might pass within 50 feet of the target, but a near miss with a time-fused shell was still a complete miss. Time fuses detonated at preset intervals regardless of target proximity. The proximity fuse solved this problem through technology that Japanese intelligence never fully comprehended throughout the war. Designated the VT fuse, shorthand for variable time though actually meaning proximity, the device contained a miniature radio transmitter and receiver inside the shell's nose. The transmitter broadcast continuously during flight. When radio waves reflected off a target and returned to the receiver, the frequency shifted due to the Doppler effect. An electronic circuit detected this shift, and when it reached a predetermined level, indicating the target was within lethal range, the circuit closed, sending current to a detonator that exploded the main charge. The result was a shell that would detonate within 30 to 50 feet of any aircraft, regardless of whether the gunner's aim was perfect. The technology had existed since early 1943, but operational security restricted its use to naval warfare until December 1944. The Navy feared that if used over land, duds might be recovered by enemy forces and reverse-engineered. Only when the Bulge offensive threatened to break through American lines in Europe did the restrictions lift for ground warfare. By April 1945, when Operation Kikusui began, every American warship at Okinawa carried proximity-fused ammunition as standard load. The shells cost $18 each to manufacture, a trivial expense compared to the millions of dollars represented by a destroyer or the lives of 300 crew members. Fire control doctrine emphasized saturation. When kamikaze aircraft entered range, directors would designate targets, and gun mounts would fire continuous salvos, creating a shell pattern that made the target's flight path a zone of overlapping detonations. A single 5-inch mount firing at maximum rate could place 20 rounds per minute into the air. A Fletcher-class destroyer, with 5 5-inch mounts, could create a defensive barrier of 100 proximity-fused shells per minute. The Okinawa campaign would prove whether these defensive improvements could counter kamikaze tactics employed at unprecedented scale. Japanese planners designated 10 major Kikusui operations between April and June 1945, intending to launch over 1,500 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet. The radar picket, destroyers positioned around Okinawa, would face the first and most intense attacks. These vessels operated alone or in pairs, 75 miles from the main fleet, their mission to provide early radar warning of approaching raids. The picket stations represented ideal targets for kamikaze pilots. Single destroyers without the concentrated firepower of task force formations. Predictable positions that made navigation simple. Radar-equipped vessels, whose destruction would blind American defenses. Between April 6 and June 22, 1945, radar picket stations recorded 587 individual kamikaze attacks. American defensive fire destroyed 412 of these aircraft before they could strike targets, 70% kill rate. The mathematics of this destruction rate deserve examination because they reveal how completely American technology had negated the tactical calculations underlying kamikaze doctrine. Vice Admiral Ugaki projected in October 1944 that kamikaze attacks would achieve 20% hit rates. At Okinawa, the actual hit rate against radar picket destroyers was 29%. This appeared to validate Japanese tactical assumptions. But Japanese planners had calculated that 20% hit rate against a fleet with contemporary October 1944 defenses. By April 1945, American defenses had improved to the point where 70% of all attacking aircraft died before reaching targets. Of the 30% that survived to attack, only 1 in 3 struck successfully. The compound probability meant approximately 10% of kamikaze sorties achieved hits. Japanese doctrine required this rate to be sustainable, but replacing the aircraft and pilots lost in 9 out of 10 sorties was impossible. Japan's remaining aviation fuel supplies could support perhaps 5,000 total sorties. If 90% failed to reach targets, the entire strategic reserve would be expended, destroying perhaps 500 ships, a fraction of the American fleet. The tactical reality was even worse for Japanese planners. The 70% destruction rate before reaching targets meant experienced pilots died in overwhelming numbers. Replacement pilots with minimal training performed worse in subsequent attacks. By May 1945, kill rates against kamikaze aircraft approaching radar picket stations exceeded 75%. The survival rate had dropped to 1 in 4. USS Bush, the destroyer where gunners Mate Karr served, faced systematic annihilation on April 6 during the first Kikusui operation. At 1300 hours, the ship's air search radar detected multiple contacts bearing 320 degrees, range 32 miles. Director crews trained their Mark 37 systems on the incoming formation. Visual identification confirmed 20 aircraft, all on kamikaze approach vectors. Bush's 5 5-inch mounts opened fire at 22,000 yards. Proximity-fused shells began detonating among the formation at 18,000 yards. The first kamikaze aircraft disintegrated in a black smoke burst. The second followed 12 seconds later. The third, fourth, and fifth died within 90 seconds as the director systematically designated targets and the gun crews maintained fire discipline. The remaining aircraft scattered, some attempting evasive maneuvers, others maintaining their attack runs. Bush's 5-inch mounts firing in director control mode could engage only one target at a time, but automatic weapons crews added their fire. 40mm and 20mm guns created a secondary defensive layer at closer ranges. Between 1300 hours and 1345 hours, Bush's gun crews destroyed 11 kamikaze aircraft outright. 3 more fell to combat air patrol fighters that arrived after radio calls for assistance. 6 aircraft penetrated the defensive fire. 3 struck Bush directly. 2 hit the nearby destroyer Colhoun, 1 missed and crashed into the sea. Both destroyers sank. 154 American sailors died. From a Japanese tactical perspective, this represented a successful attack. 2 destroyers destroyed for 20 aircraft expended. But from a strategic perspective, the mathematics were devastating. The first Kikusui operation launched 355 kamikaze aircraft. American defenses destroyed 230 before they reached any targets, 65% kill rate. Of the 125 aircraft that reached the target zone, 70 failed to score hits, 55 struck ships successfully. The operation achieved 15% overall success rate against a fleet prepared for kamikaze attacks and equipped with the latest defensive technology. At Leyte Gulf in October, with surprise on their side and facing ships with inferior defenses, kamikazes had achieved a 29% success rate. The trend was clear. As American defenses improved, kamikaze effectiveness declined. The Japanese had not anticipated that defensive technology would advance faster than their ability to deploy attackers. Radar picket duty became the most hazardous assignment in the Navy during the Okinawa campaign. Destroyers on picket stations had a 1 in 3 chance of being struck by kamikaze attacks. Crews understood this statistically. They requested it anyway. The reason was simple. The alternative was worse. If radar pickets failed to stop kamikazes at the outer perimeter, the aircraft would reach the transport areas where invasion forces were vulnerable. A transport ship could carry 1,000 troops. Its destruction would kill soldiers who had survived training, transport across the Pacific, and the initial amphibious assault. Destroyer crews accepted higher casualties to protect invasion forces. This calculation reflected broader strategic thinking that shaped American defensive doctrine. Accept losses where defensive capabilities were strongest to protect assets where they were weakest. Destroyers equipped with Mark 37 directors and proximity fuses had the best chance of surviving kamikaze attacks. Transports with minimal armament had almost no chance. The mathematics demanded placing the strongest defenses in the most exposed positions. Combat records from radar picket stations reveal how completely gun crews dominated aerial combat when provided adequate technology and training. USS Laffey, a destroyer assigned to Radar Picket Station No. 1 on April 16, 1945, faced systematic destruction by 22 kamikaze aircraft and 6 conventional bombers over an 80-minute period. The ship's gun crews, using director control and proximity-fused ammunition, destroyed 9 kamikaze aircraft outright at ranges exceeding 5,000 yards. Automatic weapons crews shot down 3 more inside 2,000 yards. Combat air patrol fighters claimed 6 additional kills. 4 kamikaze aircraft struck Laffey directly. 2 bombs hit. The destroyer survived, stayed afloat, returned to port under her own power. Post-action analysis credited the survival to crew training and proximity-fused ammunition. Of the 9 kamikaze aircraft destroyed by 5-inch gunfire, 7 fell to proximity-fused shells that detonated near but not directly on target. Traditional time-fused ammunition would have required direct hits to achieve kills. The probability of scoring direct hits against 9 separate maneuvering targets in combat conditions approached 0. Proximity fuses had turned near misses into kills, approximately quadrupling effective hit rates against aerial targets. The technological superiority American gun crews enjoyed over their Japanese opponents was not merely a matter of better equipment. It represented fundamentally different approaches to weapons development and tactical implementation. Japan had developed excellent optical fire control systems during the 1930s. The Type 94 director employed sophisticated mechanical computers that could calculate firing solutions against moving targets with precision comparable to early American systems. Japanese 5-inch guns mounted on destroyers and cruisers had range and accuracy sufficient for effective anti-aircraft work. What Japan lacked was not capability in individual components, but integration of those components into a system that multiplied effectiveness beyond the sum of its parts. American naval doctrine since the 1920s had emphasized fire control as a system problem rather than a gunnery problem. This philosophical difference shaped development in ways that became decisive during the Pacific War. Japanese doctrine treated the gun as the primary weapon, with fire control as a supporting element. Training emphasized individual gun crew skill. Directors provided data, but gun captains retained authority to override solutions based on experience and judgment. This approach worked adequately against surface targets where engagement times allowed deliberation. Against aircraft moving at 300 miles per hour, human judgment introduced delays that meant missing targets. American doctrine treated the entire fire control system, from radar detection through shell detonation, as a single integrated weapon. The gun was merely the launching mechanism. The director was the brain. Proximity fuses were the sensory organs that allowed shells to find targets autonomously. Training emphasized crew coordination within the system. Gun captains followed director solutions without deviation unless equipment failure forced manual control. This systematic approach removed human error from the engagement sequence at the cost of requiring crews to trust technology over instinct. The results validated the American approach completely. Ships employing director control with proximity fuses achieved kill rates against kamikaze aircraft 3 to 4 times higher than vessels relying on local control with time-fused ammunition. The second Kikusui operation, launched on April 12, 1945, demonstrated how quickly Japanese tactical adjustments became inadequate against American defensive improvements. Vice Admiral Ugaki, analyzing the first operation's disappointing results, modified attack profiles. Kamikaze aircraft would approach at extremely low altitude, below effective radar detection range, then pop up for final dives from 2,000 feet rather than the previous 10,000-foot approaches. This tactic was intended to reduce exposure time to defensive fire. American radar picket destroyers detected the modification immediately and adapted their defensive doctrine within hours. Mark 37 directors could track targets at altitudes as low as 50 feet under good sea state conditions. Low-altitude approaches actually reduced kamikaze effectiveness by limiting the pilot's ability to select optimal impact points and by forcing aircraft into the engagement envelope of automatic weapons. 40mm and 20mm guns that were ineffective against high-altitude targets became primary defensive weapons against aircraft at 500 feet altitude. The second Kikusui operation launched 185 kamikaze aircraft. American defenses destroyed 139 before they reached targets, 75% kill rate. The tactical adjustment had worsened Japanese losses rather than improving effectiveness. Post-war interrogations of surviving Japanese naval aviators revealed that most pilots never understood why American anti-aircraft fire had become so devastatingly effective. They reported that shells seemed to explode with impossible accuracy, that defensive fire was so dense it created visible barriers, that aircraft approaching American ships would disintegrate without apparent cause. Some attributed this to superior American radar. Others believed Americans had developed acoustic proximity fuses that detected engine noise. A few speculated about radio-controlled shells, though this was dismissed as technologically impossible. The truth, that individual shells carried miniaturized radar systems capable of autonomous target detection, exceeded what most Japanese engineers considered achievable with 1940s technology. Japan's own proximity fuse research had concluded in 1942 that miniaturization requirements made the concept impractical for military use. This failure of imagination was compounded by operational security that prevented Japanese forces from recovering intact proximity fuses for analysis. American doctrine required all anti-aircraft engagements over water, specifically to prevent dud shells from falling into enemy hands. When proximity fuses were finally authorized for use over land during the Battle of the Bulge, the European theater was too chaotic for systematic recovery operations. By the time Japanese intelligence obtained even fragmentary information about proximity fuse technology, the war was effectively over. The industrial implications of American proximity fuse production exceeded even the tactical advantages. Between January 1943 and August 1945, American factories manufactured 22 million proximity fuses. Each fuse contained 130 precision components, including 4 miniaturized vacuum tubes. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Total component count exceeded 2,800,000,000 individual parts, all manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. This production volume represented manufacturing capability that no other nation could match. Japan's entire electronics industry in 1945 could not have produced proximity fuses at 1% of American production rates, even if Japanese engineers had solved the technical challenges. The strategic disparity was absolute. The human cost of this technological superiority manifested in statistics that revealed the Kamikaze campaign's ultimate futility. Between October 1944 and August 1945, Japan launched approximately 2,800 organized kamikaze sorties against American naval forces. American defensive fire destroyed approximately 1,900 of these aircraft before they could strike targets. 68% overall kill rate. Of the 900 aircraft that reached the target zone, roughly 475 struck ships successfully. 1,900 kamikaze pilots died, achieving 475 hits, a 4-to-1 loss ratio that was unsustainable given Japan's limited aviation fuel and trained pilot reserves. The Americans lost 47 ships sunk and over 200 damaged to kamikaze attacks during this period. These were significant losses, but they represented approximately 2% of American naval forces committed to Pacific operations. Japan had expended irreplaceable resources, achieving tactically significant but strategically insufficient results. The mathematical reality was inescapable. To inflict losses that would force American withdrawal or negotiated peace, Japan needed to sink or damage at least 30% of the invasion fleet. At observed hit rates and destruction ratios, this would require approximately 15,000 kamikaze sorties. Japan's total remaining aviation fuel supplies in April 1945 could support approximately 5,000 sorties. Even if every remaining aircraft was expended in kamikaze attacks, even if hit rates remained constant despite declining pilot quality, the maximum achievable damage would be approximately 10% of American naval strength, insufficient to alter strategic outcomes. Vice Admiral Ugaki understood these mathematics by May 1945. His diary entries from this period reveal a man comprehending the futility of continued kamikaze operations while remaining committed to executing them. On May 11th, he wrote that American defensive fire had become so effective that survival rates for kamikaze pilots had dropped below acceptable thresholds. On May 28th, he noted that replacement pilots were so poorly trained that many could not navigate to target areas successfully. On June 6th, he acknowledged that continued operations were achieving nothing beyond killing Japan's remaining pilots without meaningful strategic impact. Yet operations continued. The 10th and final Kikusui operation launched on June 22, 1945 consisted of 45 aircraft. American defenses destroyed 34, 76% kill rate. 11 aircraft reached the target zone, 4 scored hits, 1 destroyer damaged. The operation achieved 9% success rate. By every tactical and strategic measure, kamikaze operations had failed. The technology that enabled American success existed because of decisions made years before Pearl Harbor. Development of the Mark 37 Director began in 1933, driven by naval officers who understood that aircraft would become the dominant threat to surface vessels. Proximity fuse research began in 1940, funded by the National Defense Research Committee under scientists who believed miniaturization challenges could be solved through systematic engineering. Production of both systems reached mass scale by 1943 through industrial organization that prioritized manufacturability over performance optimization. These were not war-winning superweapons. They were very good weapons produced in overwhelming quantities. That approach proved decisive. The story of kamikaze attacks and American defensive technology reveals fundamental truths about how wars are won through technological superiority. Japan had excellent pilots, well-designed aircraft, and tactical doctrines that maximized effectiveness of limited resources. What Japan lacked was the industrial base to produce defensive technology in quantities that made offensive operations sustainable. American radar-guided gun directors and proximity fuses were individually impressive, but became strategically decisive only when deployed in numbers that equipped every ship in the fleet. Gunner's Mate Second Class Robert Karr survived the sinking of USS Bush on April 6, 1945. Rescued after 3 hours in the water, he was transferred to another destroyer and returned to radar picket duty within a week. Post-war interviews found him remarkably matter-of-fact about his experience. He described the Mark 37 Director as the finest piece of equipment he ever operated, noting that it turned an impossible job into merely a very difficult one. He estimated his gun crews destroyed at least 7 kamikaze aircraft during his time on picket duty. He credited proximity fuses with making this possible, stating flatly that without them, kamikaze attacks would have been unstoppable. His assessment matched formal post-war analysis by naval historians. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that proximity fuses increased anti-aircraft effectiveness by factor of 3 to 4 against conventional aircraft and by factor of 5 to 6 against kamikaze attacks, where targets did not attempt evasive maneuvers. Without proximity fuses, kamikaze hit rates would have exceeded 40%. At that success rate, the tactic would have been strategically viable. American casualties would have forced either withdrawal from forward positions or acceptance of losses that would have extended the war significantly. The proximity fuse and radar-directed gunfire prevented this outcome. The question of whether kamikaze tactics would have proven effective without American technological superiority remains historically interesting but ultimately academic. Wars are decided not by hypothetical capabilities, but by actual resources deployed effectively. Japan possessed neither the electronics industry to develop proximity fuses nor the manufacturing capacity to produce them at scale. America possessed both and used them decisively. This industrial disparity extended beyond individual weapons to encompass entire systems of warfare. Japanese kamikaze doctrine assumed that American defenses would remain static, that the tactical environment of October 1944 would persist through 1945. This assumption ignored American capacity for rapid innovation and implementation of technological improvements. Between October 1944 and April 1945, American naval defenses improved across every measurable category. Radar systems became more sensitive. Gun directors received updated computers with faster processing. Proximity fuse reliability increased from 90% to 95%. Crew training emphasized lessons learned from early kamikaze encounters. The cumulative effect transformed American naval defenses from marginally effective to dominant in 6 months. Japan had no equivalent capacity for rapid innovation under wartime conditions. Fuel shortages limited pilot training. Material shortages prevented aircraft production from meeting replacement rates. Strategic bombing destroyed what little electronics industry Japan possessed. By mid-1945, Japanese forces were not merely losing battles, but losing the capacity to continue fighting effectively. The Kamikaze campaign represented Japan's last offensive capability, and even that was being systematically destroyed by American defensive technology. The final statistics tell the story completely. Japan launched approximately 9,000 kamikaze aircraft during the war. American defensive fire destroyed approximately 7,000 before they reached targets. 78% kill rate. 2,000 aircraft reached the target zone. Approximately 900 scored hits. 10% overall success rate. This success rate was 1/3 of what Japanese planners calculated was necessary for tactical viability, and 1/10 of what was necessary for strategic impact. The discrepancy between Japanese projections and actual results derived entirely from American technological superiority in radar fire control and proximity-fused ammunition. Without these technologies, kamikaze attacks would have achieved 30 to 40% hit rates as Japanese planners projected. With these technologies, hit rates remained below 15%, even under ideal conditions for attackers. The mathematical inevitability of Japanese defeat was absolute. Technology did not merely provide American forces with an advantage, it rendered Japanese tactics obsolete faster than Japan could develop counters. The human dimension of this technological dominance manifested in individual stories of survival and loss. USS Laffey's crew of 330 men faced 22 kamikaze aircraft and 6 conventional bombers during 80 minutes of continuous attack on April 16, 1945. 31 sailors died. 72 were wounded. 227 survived specifically because their proximity-fused ammunition destroyed 9 attacking aircraft that would otherwise have struck the ship. Each of those 227 survivors owed their lives to vacuum tubes no larger than a thumb, capable of surviving 20,000 times the force of gravity, manufactured in factories across America by workers who never saw combat. This was how America won the Pacific War, not through individual heroism, though that existed in abundance, but through systematic application of technological superiority, manufactured at industrial scale, and deployed with a doctrine that maximized effectiveness. The proximity fuse represented everything that made American military power decisive in World War II. It combined advanced technology with practical engineering. It required massive investment but produced proportionate results. It was sophisticated yet manufacturable, effective yet affordable at scale, innovative yet reliable. It transformed warfare by making the impossible routine. The legacy of radar-guided gunfire and proximity fuses extended far beyond World War II into modern military development. The techniques developed for miniaturizing electronics became foundational for subsequent advances. Missile guidance systems drew directly on proximity fuse technology. The concept of distributed intelligence, where individual munitions carry sensors and processors, traces its lineage to VT fuses. Modern smart weapons that can sense targets and optimize detonation represent evolution of principles established between 1940 and 1945. The engineers and scientists who developed these technologies went on to distinguished careers shaping post-war American industry. The workforce trained to manufacture proximity fuses became the foundation for the consumer electronics industry. The supply chains established for military production supported civilian markets after the war. The intellectual capital and industrial infrastructure created to defeat Japan became the basis for American technological leadership throughout the second half of the 20th century. Vice Admiral Ugaki, commanding kamikaze operations to the war's end, flew his own suicide mission on August 15, 1945, hours after Japan's surrender. His final diary entry expressed bewilderment that Japanese pilots had achieved so little despite their sacrifice. He attributed the failure to inadequate numbers rather than to the tactical futility of attacking ships equipped with defensive technology that rendered kamikaze doctrine obsolete. This final failure of understanding was perhaps inevitable. To acknowledge that American technology had rendered Japanese tactics ineffective would have required acknowledging that the entire strategic basis for continued resistance was invalid. Ugaki could not make that acknowledgement and remain committed to leading men to certain death. So he blamed numbers rather than recognizing that no number of kamikaze aircraft would overcome the defensive superiority American technology provided. The truth was simpler and more absolute. Japan launched 9,000 kamikazes. American radar-guided gunners destroyed 7,000. The mathematics were decisive. The technology was overwhelming. The outcome was inevitable from the moment American factories began producing proximity fuses in quantities that equipped every gun on every ship in the Pacific Fleet. Gunner's Mate Robert Karr asked decades later what he remembered most clearly about radar picket duty, described not the attacks or the fear, but the absolute confidence that his equipment would work. He knew the director would track targets. He knew the fuses would detonate at optimal range. He knew that if he and his crew did their jobs correctly, they would survive. That confidence, he said, made all the difference. It was confidence born of technology, training, and the certain knowledge that American industry had provided tools adequate to the task. That confidence proved justified. The ships equipped with Mark 37 directors and proximity fuses survived at rates dramatically higher than vessels with inferior equipment. The crews trained in director operation and fire discipline achieved kill rates that made kamikaze attacks unsustainable. The industrial base that produced millions of fuses and thousands of directors ensured that technological superiority translated to tactical dominance across the entire Pacific theater. This was how free societies win wars against totalitarian regimes, not through matching, fanaticism, or accepting comparable casualties, but through systematic application of superior technology manufactured at scale impossible for dictatorships to match. The proximity fuse and radar director proved that democratic capitalism, for all its inefficiencies in peacetime, becomes devastatingly effective when focused on military production. The scientists worked because they believed in the cause. The engineers innovated because they had freedom to experiment. The factory workers produced because they understood their work saved American lives. The system worked because every participant from laboratory to combat understood their role in a larger mission. Japan could not replicate this system because totalitarian control stifles the innovation that produces technological breakthrough. The kamikaze pilots died with courage, but without the technology that might have made their sacrifice meaningful. The American gunners survived not merely through courage, but through equipment that transformed bravery into effectiveness. The difference was absolute. It was decisive. It was the difference between 9,000 aircraft launched and 7,000 destroyed. It was the difference between Japanese projections and American results. It was the difference between tactical desperation and technological dominance. The story of kamikaze attacks and American defensive technology ultimately demonstrates that wars are won not by those willing to die, but by those capable of preventing death through superior capability. Japan found 10,000 pilots willing to die. America built systems that prevented those deaths from mattering. That capability, more than any single battle or campaign, determined the Pacific War's outcome. The proximity fuse carried aboard millions of shells, fired from thousands of guns, guided by hundreds of radar directors, operated by tens of thousands of trained gunners, represented American power in its most concentrated form. It was science wedded to industry. Producing warfare at industrial scale with technological superiority that could not be matched or countered. The Japanese never understood what killed them. They reported only that American ships had become impossible to attack successfully, that defensive fire was too accurate, that survival was impossible. They were right. Survival was impossible because American technology had made it so. 7,000 kamikaze aircraft destroyed before reaching targets proved the point absolutely. No tactic, no matter how desperate or innovative, could overcome the systematic superiority that American radar-guided gunners with proximity-fused ammunition represented. This was not merely a tactical advantage. It was a comprehensive demonstration of industrial, technological, and systematic superiority that rendered Japanese offensive capability obsolete. The war in the Pacific ended not because Japan ran out of pilots willing to die, but because American technology made their deaths strategically meaningless. That truth, more than any other single factor, explains why the kamikaze campaign failed. Japan launched 9,000. America destroyed 7,000. The numbers tell the complete story. Technology defeated desperation. Industry defeated sacrifice. Systematic superiority defeated tactical innovation. The outcome was never in doubt once American factories began producing the tools that made radar-guided gunnery with proximity-fused ammunition standard equipment across the fleet. The kamikaze pilots died bravely but uselessly because American gunners had equipment that transformed impossible accuracy into routine performance. That transformation represented the true meaning of technological superiority in modern warfare. It was comprehensive, it was decisive. It was the reason America won. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.